Let's talk about font styles. This is really one of the most important pieces of creating a style guide is what do our fonts look like? One of the things about HTML that I always hear is fonts are so limited. I only have a certain amount of fonts that I can work on. And I actually think that's a plus for design. You really don't want to go crazy because one of the most important things about fonts is when you specify a font, you're actually looking at the font that's loaded into the machine that the reader is on. Whether it be a phone, whether it be a tablet, be it a Mac or a PC, when you specify Times or Arial, it's actually checking to see that that's loaded into the operating system. If it's not, you need to have a backup. So a lot of times when we actually specify fonts, we want to specify something a lot more generic. This is why there is no crazy fonts in HTML, why everyone complains about it so limited. But the reality is fonts are going to be about the long term. We want to make sure that everyone can read. This is not going to be in the case always. In the next chapter, we'll look at creating custom fonts. But in the first one, let's look at being able to look at the attributes of fonts, because this is a lot of where the power of good CSS is to really make something really beautiful out of something very limited. So I have my HTML file. In my style guide, the first thing that I'm going to do is we've looked at color before. I'm going to start establishing my language. And this is the first piece of the different key elements that I'm going to specify. I'm going to really quickly set up some really basic HTML tags. I'm going to call my H1s here. And I'm just going to make a copy of these really, really quickly. I want to be able to specify any font that I'm going to need in this style guide to begin to experiment with. So I'm going to put down paragraphs. I'm going to begin to set up headers. So let's say header 1, header 2, which is kind of a subheader. I would say this is a subheader. This is going to be an H3. This is going to be an H2. Again, I'm using the basic HTML code. I'm using an H4. And then I'm going to call this the detail header. Again, I have a paragraph. I'm also going to set up my languages for bolds. I'm going to set up my language for any color attribute or any text attribute that I want. This is where I'm actually going to begin to take a look at using that nice character styles of font sizes, font widths and bolds and everything that I really want to make things look sexy. So I'll say underline text. Again, a little bit setup, but this is the start of my style guide. Now I'm going to go back to my browsers. I'm going to reload. And here you go. It doesn't really look like anything. I do have some remnants of a style sheet, so I'm going to clean up my style sheet. I'm going to delete the old stuff from the color. And voila. Looks really, really basic. I'm going to start playing with different features next, but really the goal is beginning to lay out the font styles. So the first thing is we're going to look at establishing bold. We're going to look at bold. We're going to look at heights. We're going to look at typefaces and then styles. So next step is now that I've established my header types, let's just look at code first, and then we'll start adding it into our style guide. And I can do that here too. I can do H1. I know I'm going to affect an H2, an H3, an H4, a paragraph, and of course it likes to autocorrect, a bold tag, and an underline tag. And of course, good housekeeping always tells me, let's make sure we put brackets on here and the right brackets before we do anything else, because that would be really embarrassing in this example if I broke it before we even began. Okay, so usually in a hierarchy on a page, the H1 needs to be the most important thing on the page. The H2, less important, that would be your subhead. The H3 would be the head of let's say, a paragraph, and the H4 would be a caption. You don't want to go a little bit too further than that. The reality is if we do our job right with CSS, we're also going to be doing a good job of doing good SEO as well. Because good SEO tells me that the most important thing on the page is an H1. The second least important thing is an H2, et cetera, and et cetera. So this is where sort of SEO meets good housekeeping and CSS. So we're going to help each other out. So we've got an underline tag. We're really pretty much ready to go. Again, we haven't done anything. We'll reload the page. Notice anything happens. In this case, the underline actually comes out of the style. So we might have to zap that in our reset.css, but I'm okay with it right now because I am going to use an underline. So at this point, now what we are going to do is let's go back to the main and let's look at the first point. Let's say we want to bold our H1. I'm going to hit enter and I'm going to start typing in my type ahead font and then weight. And font weight is where I'm actually going to add in my ability to add in bold. A lot of times we're going to use bold or strong. In this case, if I hit bold, there are options for me that are bold and bolder. I don't like using things that are bolder because sometimes the word bolder might not actually work on some certain browsers. You could also use the word strong, but I like going classic and using bold. I hit save, I go back to my page, I reload again, and there you go. There's my boldness. Now let's actually go back to all my browsers, and this is the fun part of doing this within browsers, is I reload, I'm going to zoom in so that it matches up, and that looks pretty good. Actually, they're all looking exactly the same. If I were to use bolder, it might be some slight variations, but let's reload our other page. Let's zoom in so that everyone can see it. And if you look at it, those pages are looking pretty close. There are slight, tiny little variations, just maybe a pixel here and there in terms of the width, if I actually pull all three of them together, but I think we're actually, we're not doing half bad of a job. It'll get crazier as we get closer and as we add more code, but let's see what else we can add. So we've got bold. Maybe I'll actually add a font weight to an H2 as well. Here we go. We have bold font. I reload again. There is my subhead. I reload again. I reload again. That looks really, really good. For some reason, if you want to turn it off, you can actually get rid of the line, or you can type in the word normal. Again, I don't know why you might not use normal or versus bold, but if we're actually on a style guide and you're experimenting and you're trying things out, giving yourself the ability to actually say, you know what, I want to have it bold, or I don't know if I want to be a normal, I can change it. In this case, you know, let's do bold. We want the ability to edit in our style guide. We're playing with it. We're just trying to get our styles working, and let's see what happens. There you go.